Welcome everyone to the podcast. Thank you so much as always for joining me as we dive into topics and interesting tidbits about spirit and all things mystical. Today though, we're going to talk specifically about how to make your comeback. And this topic came up because of several questions I received from many of you about, some of them have been like, I've lost my connection to spirit and it used to be so strong, but I'm just so worn out. I just can't connect anymore. Or, I've been lost in the pits of grief and I don't know how to come back to spirit. Or, the world is so chaotic. I'm stuck in fear. I can't get out of it. And these are all absolutely valid feelings and experiences, especially in our world right now. We are at such a maximal conjunction of polarity in our world right now because of the changes we're undergoing, and because the changes have reached this maximal point, is the way that spirit shows me. It's like the peak. They're saying the pinnacle, the mountaintop. Like it is that crescendo point, right, where the wave tips over. And we've been seeing many of these as we've been, trudging our way up this mountain. We've been seeing these smaller peaks, but we're at such a massive peak right now. And I know we can all look back and be like, really? I thought the massive peak was 2020. I thought it was 2021. I thought it was 2022. It has been so intense, but I really want to start first of all saying one thing that's so important to remember is that each and every one of us has chosen to be here at this time. And I know sometimes that is really hard to hear. And sometimes I don't even like hearing it either, because I'm like, listen, this is not cool. This world is crazy. How do people move through this? And I even think, I had my opportunity when I had my NDE to cross over and stay, and I chose to come back. And I'm like, I can't even go back if I want to, because I literally had the chance to go and I didn't take it, and I'm here. Like, what the heck gives? And it doesn't mean that I don't technically want to be here, I want to give up on life. But there's a point in which we reach such exhaustion, especially those of you that are obviously listening to this content and my content. You're on a path of ascension and you're on a path of growth. And as you grow, your view of the world changes, and your view and your capacity for compassion opens up, and your desire to heal opens up. And healing is not just as like putting a Band-Aid on it. Like when we heal aspects of ourselves, past trauma, ancestral lineage trauma, you name it, we have to go really deep, right? And I know you're all probably sitting there like, yes, shaking your head. Yeah, totally. That's not easy, and it takes energy. And so when there's so much healing going on and so much changing going on, and now we're at a point where there's so many changes that are just crumbling at the surface, so we're seeing it all also. Not only are we going through it internally, but we're also seeing it externally. Because this has been such a long road, so many people are just like, I'm tapped out. I have nothing left. I have nothing left to give. And it's that kind of exhaustion that I'm talking about. And I really want to first of all validate those of you that are feeling that way. I have felt that way too. Sometimes it's few and far between. Sometimes it's a little closer together. I can tell you when I was sick this past summer, that thought was there often. I was like, I just can't. I can't do this. I can't do this. But then there's always that little spark of light within that's like, yes, you can. You're meant to be here for a reason at this time. You're experiencing this hardship to learn so much more. Dig deep. Come and dig deep. Let's explore. And it is very hard to choose to explore when you're at that point. So I don't say that lightly. I don't say that as like spiritually bypassing tough stuff at all. But what I have learned through going through really tough things is that even in those moments of it being really, really tough, we can validate the really tough, and we can cry and we can feel bad for ourselves. Absolutely. Don't skip that. You have to feel the feels. But then also be curious. Keep a little curiosity, if you can, of what can I gain from this? Right? Like when I was, stuck with nausea. Nausea was the worst thing for me. It was awful. It never went away for months. And to me, that's like my kryptonite is nausea. And I was like, well, what am I learning? at this point because it's awful. I can't get rid of it. What am I learning right now? I'm like, well, I'm learning an absolute appreciation for when I don't have it. When everything in my life seems crappy or I'm just exhausted and I'm like, oh, what's the point? When I reach that point where I'm not nauseous anymore, I'm going to think, wow, at least I'm not nauseous. How lucky am I? You know, and that was one little thing for me. It can be so many different things for you, but it's, again, taking that idea of trying to find an empowerment moment in that situation or an agitation. And that's where our choice is. That's always where our choice is. It's not an easy choice, but it's always where our choice is. You know, I had another one when I was in the hospital at one point, and we were waiting there for like 12 hours, and I just felt awful. And I was like, okay, what would be worse in this situation? I'm like, well, at least I'm not in labor, because labor was way worse than this. And I know I've said this a couple of times, but like it was a significant moment for me. So I could feel a reprieve in the reality I was in because I was grateful I wasn't in one that was worse. Again, it's that choice moment. It didn't change my reality, but it changed my perspective of it. And for that little bit of time, it offered some reprieve, right? So I'm saying all of these things because I really want to validate again how you're feeling or how many people are feeling. It is so tough to transform, and 2025 is a magnificent year. It's also a very transformative year yet again, right? We're in this new energy phase of these next 3 years. So it doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but we're way more empowered now than we were in 2020. Much more empowered. We have more consciousness, we have more wisdom, we have a better ability of discernment. You know, we know when to pull inward and kind of reframe. Like we're way more geared up, right? The image Spirit is showing me right now is, you know, someone that steps into battle with just a bow, right? Or somebody that steps into battle with a flak jacket, grenades, gun, bow, all of the things. Like they are prepared for it. And not that this year has to be a internal war, but it's just that concept of you are so much more prepared now. So your choice really does make a difference. Now, that's all great in theory, right? We can say that it's great in theory, but then it comes down to the exhaustion piece that so many are feeling, and I have been there also. Like it's hard to stay in the constant either fight or flight for some. For others, it's the constant busyness of everything on their plate. We live in a society where the speed of which we need to move through a day is very, very fast. It is very fast. It does not allow space to recalibrate. And so that creates this exhaustion, and it's in this state of exhaustion that we don't know how to reconnect anymore because we've been in this survival mode, and now we're trying to reconnect in, and we're just like, what do I do? How do I don't even know. So here's the thing. The first thing you need to do is you need to honor you, the person, because it is the person in the body and the mind that is tired. Your spirit isn't tired, but your body and your mind is tired from the pace in which we're moving in this lifetime. So the first thing, how can you reconnect with you? What do you need in that moment? And we've talked about this on Spirit Coffee Talk too. What do you need in that moment to allow yourself to feel safe? What do you need in this moment to feel comforted? And so for some people, it might be turning your phone off, like not just silent, but off. So you can feel that disconnect where you're just like, oh, everything's quiet. For others, it might be grabbing a really warm blanket and a book and giving yourself the afternoon off or the evening off or a weekend morning off where you just read. And in that moment, you can disappear into a fantasy world. It's not escapism when you're doing it consciously, to give yourself space for a moment, to stop the busy and come back into a grounded space. So first thing is, what do you need and what can you do? Acts of kindness for yourself, gentle, sweet acts of kindness for you, from you, is the greatest gift you can ever give yourself. Because essentially, the validation you're seeking for anything in this world is actually the validation from self, like true validation from self. And if you're not quite sure what I mean is, let's just think of the ability to rest or the worthiness to rest. How many of you feel like you can't actually rest because there's too much stuff to do and you feel guilty and you can't sit down? you would love for someone to tell you you can sit down, but even if someone told you you could sit down, you would still think you can't, because essentially you're waiting for the validation from self. Like true validation from self to say, hey, I can stop, I can rest. So finding what you can do to nurture self and creating that stop point can really help. And that might be something that lasts a couple days. It could last a couple weeks, right? You might need to really turn on the self-care for a couple weeks for sure, for your body systems to recalibrate, for your nervous system to come down, for you to feel safe in your space again, for you to feel safe in your body again. You have to nurture it, and the only one that can really do that is you. You have to give yourself the space and the time and the actions to nurture you. Then once you feel like you've tapped into that nurturing though, then you can start to reconnect in next to your higher self. And let me just, before I get to the higher self part of the nurturing self too is actually like even acts of journaling, or maybe speaking out loud. Maybe you paint and express, or you draw your feelings. But once you move from that critical phase, which is what do you need to nurture yourself right now to feel comfort, as you start to soften into that, then you can start to kind of tune into your feelings and express them. So through writing, through art, through drawing, through movement even, and be conscious of what's coming out. And then after that point is when you want to connect back into your higher self. And when you connect back into your higher self, for some it can be through a meditation, it can be through conscious writing. Again, you could choose to have a conversation with your higher self, set up a chair across from you, and imagine your higher self sitting there talking to you. And you literally speak it out. It's the action of the doing that makes it real, right? And so when you start to reconnect into your higher self, it's about remembering that your higher self is the most purest connection to you that there is, because it is you. It is that higher self you. And if you don't understand the higher self, the best way to imagine it would be like an entire pie, okay? We have an apple pie. The whole pie is your higher self. It is everything you are as a soul, split off from source. And right now, you are living a piece of that apple pie as the expression of you, right? So right now, I'm living a piece of apple pie that is expressed as Ginette, okay? When you cross over and you leave this planet, that piece of pie will connect back into the whole pie. But just because you are one piece of pie right now, it doesn't mean you can't connect into the rest of the whole pie also. In fact, the more you expand your consciousness, the more, I guess we could say pieces of apple from that apple pie fill up your slice. You could eventually, technically, I guess, bring more of your higher self, or maybe your entire higher self, down into your connection to your embodiment. I think your body would have to be able to handle a lot of frequency for a full higher self, but we're always able to bring more slices of pie into this incarnation. I hope that makes sense. And so when you reconnect into your higher self and you start to feel that connection, and again, you don't have to rush it, there's no pressure, it just is. When you start to feel you can get that energetic flow going, that conversation going, the signs and symbols coming from your higher self, the comfort coming from it, it's after that point that you can start to reconnect in with spirit. And the reason why it's so important to get to your higher self first, again, is because it is you. It is the aspect of you. It is that high frequential spirit-like aspect that is you. And if you connect back into that first, then you can connect into all of the rest of them. You don't want to miss out your connection with your higher self. But what happens is when we get so worn out, so kind of beaten down by the world and the pace in which we're trying to be in this world, we lose the connection with the higher self, and then we lose the connection with self, right? Like we don't feel our emotions, we don't, all of that. So we have to kind of go backwards and reconnect those pieces, because often that's why it's often difficult to feel completely stressed out, completely detached from self, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to tune into spirit, and then you're like, oh, I get nothing. It's because you're not connected in first. And one of the things that my guide said early on in my journey with spirit is that the key to accessing the universe and everything spirit is through the portal of the heart. You have to move through the heart first. And they showed me this heart that opened up into this kind of like diamond, and I could see like the universe through it. The access to everything you would want is through the heart. You can't access the heart without accessing you, the human, first, and then you, the higher self. And so for some of you, this reconnection could be very, very fast. It could be an afternoon, you reconnecting with self, you reconnecting with the higher self. The next day, you're hearing spirit. That evening, you're hearing spirit. For others, depending on what's been going on in your life, it takes a little bit longer. And there's no right or wrong. Even if you've been super connected into spirit before, and then it takes you a couple weeks to get connected back in, that is completely okay. It just speaks to the magnitude of disconnect that has happened for you, and that is not a judgment either. The disconnect is because of the pace of the world we live in. It is not the same as it was 50 years ago. We can look at this in so many different ways. We can look at the economics, we can look at the medical system, we can look at our health and wellness. Our body's capacity for health and wellness is not the same as it was 50 years ago. Even longer, let's say 100 years ago. Because the pace of the world in which we live in all of the ways, is too fast. It is too disconnected, actually, is what I want to say. Because if we were deeply connected in, our pace of growth can be really fast, but we need to be growing in the multidimensional nature that we are, not simply in one linear way. And so I say that because I want you to really feel the compassion and really remove the judgment, because that's another piece, is that we're so stuck under judgment and shame and shoulds and guilt, of lack of measuring up, either financially or maybe physically. You're feeling like you're not your best self and you should be. Maybe you're not as productive as you should be. Maybe, like, all of these shoulds and shame. It just wreaks havoc on our frequency. Shoulds and shame disconnect us from feeling, because we don't like feeling that. And then we disconnect. And then when we disconnect, what happens? We lose connection with self, with heart, higher self, with spirit. It just is this whole thing. So again, that's why I really wanted to share for all of you that are feeling like, I don't know how to connect in. It's not that spirit doesn't want to talk to you by any means. They are near and dear. They are with you. They are listening. But you need to connect into you first. And when you do that, you will feel so much more nourished simply by nourishing self first. And it's often the last thing we think of. And I've been there too, trust me. And I'll probably be there again, because life happens and we can be as spiritual as we want to, but if we're living in this world and trying to maneuver this world with family and kids and finances, we can't maneuver it in perfection. We are going to undulate through the highs and the lows. It will happen, but it's about your perspective and how your perspective can bring you back to what is real, which is you. So I really hope this helps all of you. I really do. You are so much more powerful than you likely give yourself credit for. And again, I'm generalizing. There are probably many of you that are like, don't worry, I know my power. I stand in it every day. And if that's the case, that's awesome. I'm so happy for you. I really am. It's amazing. Keep it up, because your frequency is helping those in the collective. And if you find that you struggle with that, that's okay too. I am so proud of you for engaging in content like this and looking for solutions and working to be your best self. And so again, the encouragement is nurture self first. Find your way back to you. And when you do that, you will find your way to spirit. So I'll leave that with all of you. Thank you so much, as always, for joining me on the show. I appreciate it. Please do share and subscribe and all of those kinds of things. And I will see you all next week. Have a beautiful rest of your week.